Hey, everybody, welcome to the Soul of a Writer podcast. I am Royal Banks, your host, here with Robert Jeffery. He is a comic book writer extraordinaire based in Atlanta, Georgia. So, quick bio: Robert Jeffery is an Atlanta based comic book writer who has worked for such clients as DC Comics, the Centers for Disease Control, Son of Oak Gaming, and Nito Tires. His work with the popular DC Comics character John Stewart, aka the Green Lantern, Where There Is a Will, was nominated for the 2019 Glyph Comics Award in both the Best Writer and Fan Award for Best Work categories. Robert is the graduate of the 2017 DC Comics New Talent Writer Workshop, creator of the Glyph Comics Award-winning nominated Route 3, Mind to Avenge, The Book of Layla, and co-creator of the upcoming The Crossing series. Robert is the series writer for Retcon, Changa, and the Jade Obelisk, Soul Nebula, The Consulars, and has also contributed to the Dark Universe, The Bright Empire, 8 Gunshot Stories of the West, and the Scribes of the Nyota Prose Anthologies. Robert, welcome to the show.
Hey, what's going on? It sounds like a lot.
Yeah,
Crazy.
it sounds like you have done a whole lot, you know. So just give a little bit more background. So you told me before the show that you're from Chicago, but did it all start? Did your
Mhm.
love of sci-fi and comic books start in Chicago when you were younger?
Yeah. So my mom would take my brother and I to the library on a regular basis. Like she wanted us to read as much as possible, but at least when it came to me and my brother to a certain extent, but for definitely for me, I was like a crackhead for when it came to books.
Mm.
I just tried to read as much as possible. So it could be something like Encyclopedia Brown. It could be like choose your own adventure books. I was even like a Ramona Quimby fan from like
Mhm.
back in the day, and just it was whatever was on the shelves. And from that, from the love of kind of just reading novels, that I guess you could say parlayed into comic books. So where we were growing up, we didn't have comic book stores in our neighborhoods in Southside Chicago. So my mom would pick them up from these places that where comics used to be sold, called drugstores,
Mm.
sort of like Walgreens. And after that, it just kind of blew up from there. So I connected also with a one of my cousins who was a comic book fan, and he was in the Coast Guard at the time. So he actually let me have access to all of his comic books when he was kind of out, out to sea or whatever. So shout out to Damon. But that's my love of reading kind of led to comic books, and then just kind of grew into love of sci-fi, and then also growing up on cartoons like X-Men the animated series, Batman the animated series, and whatever else came on TV on Saturday mornings or after school.
Yeah,
So
for sure. No, that's dope. So what eventually brought you to Atlanta? You went to Georgia State and you majored
mhm.
in history, right? So is that what brought you to Atlanta and you've been there ever since?
No, we wow, we left Chicago. Probably I'm 30 38 now, and we left Chicago when I was back in 95, by 95, 90, 94, 95. So that was like middle school, when I was in middle school.
Okay.
So um the the transit so I spent most of my teenage years in Georgia, and the state just kind of grew on me. So we were living with my mom up in Chicago, and then we moved down here to my brother and I with my dad and my stepmom. And we were in Decatur. If for anybody familiar with the area, we were off of Lawrenceville Highway. you know
Mhm.
um, and then after that, I went to high school at Stone Mountain High School. And then, from there, I did the 4 years, and, graduated and went to Georgia State University. So I've been in Georgia since like 1994, 95, thereabouts.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's and we're gonna kind of get into that a little bit later because
Mhm.
for one of your comments, you said it starts off in Stone Mountain,
Yeah.
Georgia. That's where
Hmm.
I'm from, or I was born in California but raised up in Stone Mountain. I didn't
Yeah.
go to Stone Mountain High. I went to Dunwoody High, but I went to
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Peachtree Middle, Rock Ridge Elementary, et cetera, and then eventually
Hmm.
went to
Yeah.
Rockdale County High School is where I graduated from. So kind of the same
Hmm.
area, just about East Greater Metro Atlanta.
Yeah. Just
Um,
Metro. Everything's Metro Atlanta, it seems like.
yeah,
I mean, Metro Atlanta saved the presidency, right? There you
Yeah,
go.
yeah, for sure. No, for sure. Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So just I am not huge into comic books
Hmm.
or graphic novels. I pitter patter with them every once in a while, look into them every once in a while. But even a quote, what do we call it? Normies, right? Even a quote, a normie has seen
Yeah.
an explosion of Black representation in characters
Hmm.
in movies and comic books. So who are the people behind that? Who are the writers behind that? Or who was the writer behind that that kind of started this explosion of Black representation over the past 10, 20 years?
Oh man. I there are a lot of, I'm gonna say this, there's too many to count, because just as with any form of art explosion, it always goes back to the indies. And I always tell people to, if they want to do homework or research into this, look at the time period. I mean, we've been doing comic books since, I think Jackie Orms, if I have that, was like one of the first Black cartoonists to have a weekly comic strip, which would still fall under, as far as I'm concerned, under the category of like comics and comic books. Dawood Anyabwile and his family were doing a comic book called Brother Man back in the late 80s, early 90s, and they were setting records for being an independently run comic book company,
Mm,
comic book publisher, going to trade shows, Black business expos, and getting out directly to Black fans, getting their product out to Black fans. So going back as far as the 30s and 90s, and I know I have a history major, but I there's a lot. So we've been doing this for a minute, but as far as where with me kind of jumping into this, the 90s were probably the biggest point in which that had a direct influence on myself and a lot of the comic book creators that are creating now. So like I said, I already mentioned Wood on Your Wheelay. There's a comic book called Tribe, which had an all Black team, which was produced or published by Image Comics. Larry Stroman was really big behind that. And then after that, I'm trying to give you like the highlights,
right, right.
to kind of, give you some kind of, points of interest. And then Milestone.
Miles.
Milestone
Yeah.
is probably one of the biggest influences on my career as a creator, and many, Black, creators of color too. Milestone was a publishing company, Black run, by people like Dennis Cowan, Dwayne McDuffie, Derek Dingle, um, God, I'm drawing like Michael Davis,
Mm,
and I know there's one or two names that I'm forgetting, so please forgive me. But their books, they created a Black comic book kind of comics universe, and with characters like Static,
mhm,
which actually was recently announced to, they're going to, Michael B. Jordan is producing a movie, based on the comic book and cartoon series. There was Icon and Rocket, Blood Syndicate, and Hardware, and Zombie, and a bunch of other things. But Milestone, their books were published and distributed by DC Comics
mm,
to across the world and across the universe, United States,
mm.
and uh, they changed the game. That was kind of a game changer for Black comic books. And then after that, there's just been further explosions of Black indie comic books. Um, I, I I'm a fan of this stuff, and I contributed to it. But the biggest thing that you want to take is that it's not even necessarily Marvel and DC who I feel are at the forefront of Black comic books right now. I think that it is indie companies that
Mm,
are killing it, or indie publishers or creators. And when those creators do pretty well, that's when the big companies come and say, "Hey, do you want to work for us?" I mean, that's how it happens in every entertainment industry.
mm,
With music, with film, with books, with prose. It's just that when people see that you're hustling and you're grinding, you have that backing of fans independently, then that's when you're kind of plucked up, to do work for the big two. And I see that happening a lot. There are definitely creators of color who do get their start just going directly with Marvel and DC, but the bulk of it I see is coming out of indies.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm happy to be a part of that movement, because what happens is, and especially with me, is I got tired of seeing Black folks relegated to either being the comic relief or always being a stereotypical villains or bad guys, or whatever, in these kind of far-flung stories or fantastical stories that I love to take in. So collectively, with us as creators, um, we're like, this is it. That's it. We're not going to keep seeing ourselves relegated to those roles. And we have there are rich stories that speak to our experiences as Black people on this planet, or people of African descent, on this planet. And um, it's a beautiful thing, man. It's there's so much. So while people are definitely seeing, the explosion of, things like Black Panther,
Hmm.
Black Lightning. I think there was even a spinoff for Black Lightning called Painkiller, which focuses on one of the characters from there. Um, and then like Watchmen with Regina King. And then
Oh,
we have
huge.
Lovecraft Country, that just
Yeah,
happened.
yeah,
So
those are, yeah, huge.
yeah, those are like notable examples. But man, it gets so much deeper than that,
Mhm.
and there's so much variety in the stories that are being told. I got bookshelves and long boxes of this stuff because I'm such a fan of it.
Yeah,
So
for sure. So what goes into creating an indie comic book? Not necessarily the imprint, but what goes into creating an actual comic book for those out there who
yeah.
want to create their own story and they're
hmm
thinking about getting a graph. They can't draw. So what all goes into that?
So as far as I'll begin with sort of the writing aspect. That'll be kind of the bulk of the info I can give on this, but or at least my experience with it. It starts with an idea. The idea can come from anywhere. It's like, if you're writing a book, you're writing a screenplay, and it has to start with just a kernel of an idea. So from there, you take that idea, and depending on your process, I usually try to outline to the best of my ability, because I need some type of direction, because otherwise I'll get lost, off the main route. And I then kind of break it down page by page. So if for like one issue, I will, if I have a 22-page issue, every page will have some type of direction, on my end, so I can just kind of, stay on that path. And after that, there's a script. So when you write in a comic book script, there are two forms. One is called the Marvel method, or kind of plot heavy script, and that's where you do kind of like a brain dump, on the page, and it's just you're listing out um, what's happening in a kind of a general fashion. It's not kind of specifically like page by page and then panel by panel. And it gives the artist a little bit more free reign, to do, um, to kind of, to work his or her magic on the page. Most people use the other method, which is called the full script. Full script, that's where it's broken down by page and by panel. So for one page, the max will be like 7 panels. So when you're reading a comic book, those 7 like boxes that you see where the action is being separated, those are the panels. And I tend to lean more towards full script.
Okay.
That is kind of close to screenwriting. It is not exactly the same, but full script is kind of my bread and butter. So once you finish a script, you send it in for edits, and to your editor, and or at least a close friend who is an expert with writing. Then you send it off to the artist. So the artist will, using whatever style or method they use, just start drawing, based on what's in the script. This can be very collaborative, and it should be. So it's kind of a lot of back and forth. But a good artist good creators overall will know that you need to kind of talk back and forth. So after the art, there comes the pencils. It's the inking, where you kind of flesh out the artwork. You give it kind of the tone and definition, and then the colors come after that. and then your lettering. And the lettering is basically where your dialogue, your sound effects, any other type of sounds or the talking heads. That's what comes, and that's normally how the at least the creative process of the book goes. Once that you get there, the book is laid out. It gets ready for printing, and then it gets out to the fans after that. So that's kind of the basic process.
Got you. Got you. No, that's really interesting. And what if someone is already has kind of a fiction novel or a book written?
Mhm.
How difficult or how easy would it be to transfer it to an actual graphic novel or a comic book? Have you seen people even do that?
I've done that.
Okay.
That's what Changa and the Jade Obelisk is.
Okay.
Changa and the Jade Obelisk was originally a part of I think it's a novel or novella series written by, and this is one guy you need to get on your show, Milton Davis. Milton Davis is one of the um, best writers in the game. Just novel prose writers in the fields of like sword and soul, black sci-fi. We call it cyberpunk, and just a really great science fiction and fantasy author. But Changa, I keep saying Changa was adapted by through the MV Media, which Milton runs, and 133 Art, which is a comic book publisher that I work for. So Milton wanted to turn the book into a comic book series,
Mhm.
and Jason Reeves, who runs 133 Art, which is a comic book publisher, asked if I'd be interested in doing it. So I basically adapted his story into hopefully it'll be like a 5 or 6 issue series, and we just released the first issue last year, or I think it was last year. The time is running together, but I think it was last year. So yeah,
For
but
sure.
yeah, so it's as far as if the process is easy, it definitely, I don't want to say it's easy, because for me it was first time doing something like that, and since then I've actually adapted. There's one other story along those lines, and um, one of the things with prose that you're not going to be able to do with comic books is get inside the character's head as much.
Mhm.
You don't want to have a lot of thought bubbles, as far as with a person, doing kind of the inner monologue. So for me, and it was a little nerve wracking. So I was actually very happy when Milton said he was very happy with the end result. I had to kind of cut. I had to cut things from the story, the kind of excess that and it wasn't bad stuff. It was just like, we can't fit everything into a book. So what I wanted to do was just trying to hit those points which made the story sing, or visually would be very interesting for an audience. I mean, this book opens up with a character being chased through a forest, and after he gets into a fight with his pursuers, he has to jump off of a waterfall. In my mind, I was like, that has to be a full page splash. This is how we're introduced, to this character's plight. So that's kind of that's the mindset that I came with when it came to adapting a very quality work, a very kick butt work into the comic book realm. So
For sure. So let's talk about some of your work. Namely, I checked out Radio Free America Book One, which I thought
mhm,
was really dope, because it
awesome.
has that marriage of hip hop, and I wouldn't even say a dystopian future because it literally takes place like this year. I mean, you wrote it
Yeah.
2000.
Mhm.
When did you write? 2015. Yeah, it starts in 2015, but it says 5 years
Uh,
later,
yeah.
2020.
Mhm.
Um, so what was the inspiration behind Radio Free America?
So for Radio Free America, I that was a series that I co-wrote with the creator, Baron, it's Dr. Baron Robert Bell, and he brought the concept to Terminus Media, the publisher at the time, and they hired me on to help kind of flesh out the story. So that's one series where I always try to give proper credit to, always give proper, not try, always give proper credit to Baron, because that was his baby.
Okay.
So as far as the story and um, where it was at, and he's also the artist on the story. So Radio Free America was, at least the way it was explained to me, was kind of think about social justice um, paired with hip hop. You know, fighting. And literally fighting the power with hip hop.
Hmm.
And what a lot of people I think sometimes forget, because sometimes the flashy nature of rap um, overshadows the socially more conscious origins of hip hop music, is that this is music of the people.
Yeah.
So in their universe, the United States has been invaded by the USSR, and actually no, just Russia. I'm sorry, I'm getting the terms wrong. Russia and a few of their allies. After a series of events, kind of leads to that, and that's something that we try to get into more in the story. And we're fighting a resistance fight. I mean, you think about, it's like the Revolutionary War, except it's with more black, brown, LGBTQ, people, just everybody that this country represents. So, and the focus of the story is on a DJ named Moses, who is brought back from a refugee camp in Canada, back to his Soviet occupied Philadelphia, so they can use his music or beats that he transmits code to help kind of take back the East Coast. So like hip hop is literally saving lives. Um, when the idea was pitched to me, and I was just like, this is also a paid project. It's like, this is great. This is, I get paid to write for something that I love. I was just I'm still hyped about the idea of the series that or this of the series or just of this universe that Baron created. And yeah, so I helped to, flesh out the first story arc and write this first story arc.
Yeah. No, I thought it was really dope because I'm reading it. I'm not going to give away too much of the story, but
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah.
a couple of the sentences in there that said, um, music has always been a way, like you said, to fight the power, quite literally, Chuck D, Flavor Flav. But
Yep.
going back to the Revolutionary War, they use music. Going back to the
Hmm.
Civil War, and I mean, even still, I don't think it's mentioned in the first book, but it made me think of when slaves were running away from the plantations. They would use music to communicate, fall the drinking gourd,
Yep.
etc. So music has always been used. And then just thinking about, in the book it says, "Hey, I got some throwbacks, man. How'd you get this? Oh, this is some old
Hmm.
Drake, some old Eminem." I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this is modern. It's scary because it also,
Yep.
50 million people are dead in the United States, or most have died from disease from nuclear fallout,
Yeah.
which is just is fascinating and it's terrifying to think of. But it also could be a hopefully not ever in this world, but something realistic, like you can use music to encode stuff,
Hmm.
to literally fight a global power. So I thought that was really powerful, and I can't wait to read the next two books. I'm going to post that in the show notes as well.
Yeah.
So you talked about being a paid writer, being a freelance writer. I mentioned in your bio that one of your clients was the CDC. So let's what goes into being a freelance writer? How do you get your stock up in that? And to anyone that wants to start or is having trouble starting, what are your tips to being a freelance writer?
So have a thick skin, there, because I just as for as many yeses and opportunities which have opened the doors to me, there have been just as many where the doors have been closed. And that's something that you have to prep for. Everybody is not going to want to work with you. No matter what your talent is, no matter how professional you are, and no matter how much of because this is for me, this is huge in the comic book industry, how much not a hole you are. So you have to be decent. I always say the three things you need to survive in comics are, know your craft, be a decent human being, and turn your work in on time.
Yeah.
But yeah, so definitely those are three tips. But also have a thick skin, know your craft. As much as you can. I have a several bookshelves filled with how to write books, how to write screenplays, screenplays, how to write video games, how to write comic books, how to write prose, how to specifically write science fiction and fantasy and prose. I try to constantly learn as much as time allows. And I feel that um, sometimes people get a little um, kind of comfortable, with where they're at. So you try to constantly learn as much as you can.
Mhm.
Um, get a handle on your finances. When if you go into freelancing full time, that's when if you don't know taxes, then find somebody who does. That's one thing I would suggest. And because I'm not a numbers person, and it's just only been recently that it's within the past couple of years that the freelancing has gotten to a point where I that's something I have to do.
Mhm.
I have to look into. And like I said, constantly learn and try to write as much as possible. Just write as much as possible. Even if you're not working on assignment, it's like riding a bike. Like because I'm an adult who hasn't ridden a bike in a while. It might be that much more difficult for me, because yeah, I haven't done it in a minute. But that's a very simple kind of piece of advice, and try to study what it takes to, outside of just like this advice, do a search on Google for what does it take to become a freelance writer. Research, that goes back to the researching writing, but research also what it means to actually go into business as a freelance writer. Maybe you can jump head first into it, but and everybody's advice is not always going to be the same, so try to parse out what works best for you, and just kind of take it from there. Because I always tell people I can give advice, but I'm not the end all be all when it comes to this. But those are things that have helped me to try to pursue a career as a freelance writer.
For sure. Understandably so. So speaking of writing, let's talk about blacksci-fi.com, where
Yeah,
and correct me if I'm wrong, you're the chief editor or you're an editor for blacksci-fi.com.
editor in chief, editor
Editor
in
in chief.
chief.
Okay, correction. Thank you.
Yeah,
So
no, you're fine. You're fine.
blacksci-fi.com.
Hmm.
You've written a few articles on there. The ones that I've seen that I thought was really cool. So you did it for Black History Month. Was it 29 days of Black folks kicking butt in sci-fi? And each piece that you write, you have a different Black character in sci-fi, literally just kicking butt. The
Hmm.
one I thought was really dope was, and I haven't seen this movie in a long time, but 28 days later,
Hmm.
where that character, she hacks that guy who was about to turn into a zombie. She just chops his arm off, just pretty much uh,
Yeah.
mercilessly. Most zombie movies, when somebody gets bitten and they're getting ready to get turned, and they're still a human. They're like, oh no, what should we do? No, she went straight
Hmm.
to business and hacked his arm off and took him out.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
let's let's go into your time at blacksci-fi.com and your contributions, and what do you see for the
Mhm.
future of that website and that brand?
The website was created by Maurice Waters. He's the founder, and he contributes to the website, but also that's that was his kind of brainchild. So I started off with the website as one of their contributing writers. This is um, mid 2000s, I guess. If you want to say mid 2000s, might be 206, 207. And I, when I first actually no, it was a little bit later than that. And things are running together for me. Anyways, after 2010, so I was writing for them because I felt that we needed our own space to talk about, the contributions of people of African descent or the African diaspora to speculative fiction, fantasy, horror, and like I mentioned before, in the areas of STEM, because a lot of times we don't hear about Black people's contributions to the sciences. So that's what Maurice had created a home for. And a few years after that, he approached me about joining on as editor in chief to help with the creative direction, with the editing, and just of for Black sci-fi. And I think that we provide a good kind of service to the industry. I mean, we definitely do um report the large, the big news, the big news events of the time or the day. I think we just ran a press release about a new Vixen comic book series that's coming up with DC Comics. But right before that, we had run an interview with a creator by the name of Greg Anderson Elise, who is one of the best comic writers in the game right now. But they were doing a Kickstarter for a series of his called that he's writing called One Nation Stronghold, and it's about a black he's an albino a black man who's an albino, but he also who actually has albinism, and he is a gay man. So that part, when you're talking about Marvel and DC, there's so many boxes that are checked with just that description that they've never touched on. And so our goal with Black Sci-Fi is to focus on those creators who are writing those stories. So just as much as we can, focus on the indie side of things, we can focus on, the big stories. So, and I feel that our writers a get a good experience when they come to the website because of having all of those different avenues, to experience.
No,
So
yeah, absolutely.
that's been that's been my goal with working as editor in chief, and I think our future is quite bright because um there's this hunger, for our stories to be told in this space. And if you're just looking at larger examples like Lovecraft Country and then Watchmen, um that people are hungry for it. And even when I do shows as a comic book creator, everybody loves this stuff. They want they want more of it. So and Black Sci-Fi will be there to report about it. So or blacksci-fi.com will be there to report on it.
And I hope so. And I'll definitely be continuing to follow you all as
Thank
I
you, man.
delve deeper into the Black sci-fi world and indie comic world. So, off the cuff,
Yeah.
your top three most underrated comic book characters of all time. Underrated. We always hear about Superman and Batman,
hmm
etc., but most underrated comic book characters of all time, in your opinion.
So first and foremost for me is a character from a Marvel comic book. The name of the comic book was Generation X, and the character was named Sync.
Mm.
And his real name was Everett Thomas, and he had the mutant ability of being able to sync with other mutants' ability. So let's say he was around Storm, he could control he could use her abilities to control the weather. If he was around Wolverine, he could use his abilities to have like heightened senses, and so, but he was just one of those guys that I don't think gets enough screen time, or at least shine time, in comic books. Um, the second one is a, you know what, I will say that I don't think she gets enough shine time because she doesn't have her own book, and she should have had it by now. Rocket, she's her why am I having a no, and this is a bucket list goal. She's a bucket list goal for me to write. I can't remember her real name. Raquel Irvin or Evans. I'm mispronouncing it. So, but Rocket, she's a part of a milestone book called Icon, and she was Icon's partner, and she was one of the first examples, at least for me, of a black teenage girl, um, a superhero. And I don't want to ruin anything about, if you ever go back and read her first run. She she spoke to the experience. I don't want to say she speaks to she was just a really well crafted character who I don't think gets as much shine time as I think she deserves.
Gotcha.
And her material is definitely worth going back to check and and read. And any character who quotes it was a Toni Morrison or W.E.B. Du Bois, I mean, or is modeled after the W.E.B. Du Bois, line of thinking, it is pretty awesome to me. So those were two. And the third one, um, she she is another character in DC. Her name is Scarlett Joe McMullen. I know it once again mispronouncing her name, but I know her as Joe. She's Sojourner Joe, and that's where the Joe comes from. She's in a series called Far Sector, but she is, um, for as far as I know, the first Black woman to ever be written into the Green Lantern Corps. So
Okay.
when you think about like Hal Jordan or John Stewart, um, Joe has, she just popped up in a series last year called Far Sector, and it's flying so far. It needs to be flying higher on everybody's radar. And the series is written by N.K. Jemisin, who is one of the best sci-fi writers out there, just period. And she's one of the biggest examples of like Black representation in speculative fiction. But I think this is her first comic book series, and she is killing it. And it's being drawn by a Black artist and colored by a Black artist by the name of Jamal Campbell. So
Okay.
yeah, so Joe, just do a search for Green Lantern Joe, and then the series name is Far Sector. When she says Sadiddy in the first issue of the series, and when she said that, that made that see. When I was like, okay, this is N.K. Jemisin writing this book, and you can kind of hear her voice, and stuff like that. And I think that's what a lot of the comic book companies are only now realizing, is that when you bring different experiences from various writers and artists into these stories, um, we can that just helps enhance it helps to enhance the brand. But also outside of just dialogue, N.K. Jemisin is just a really great science fiction writer, and the fact that it's taken this long for her to be attached to a Marvel or DC or Big Two book is kind of a travesty. So, but those are like my three kind of top characters,
Okay.
under overlooked characters in
Overall,
comics.
yeah, for sure. So what makes a horrifying villain in any of comic books or any prose or anything? What makes a terrifying villain in your opinion?
Uh, for me, it's just somebody who feels that they're right with everything that they do. Even if what they're doing is horrible, or is despicable or disgusting or depraved. Um, at the end of the day, if they're so, and they don't even have to be fanatical, you know, they can actually literally just sit back after, massacring a room full of innocent people and say, yeah, this serves my larger goals,
Mm.
you know, and I'm cool with that, and then they just go in and, drink a beer, or get a soda or something. That's for me, that's kind of a mark of a good antagonist. The mark, and then the other thing is, a really good antagonist thinks that they're the hero in the same story. Twirling the mustache, that's those types of villains. That's good. That's cool for certain types of stories, but I always feel that, people who feel that they're, on the same level as a hero, except they're just on the opposite side of it. That's the mark of a good antagonist, I feel.
Okay, okay. And then kind of going back to the underrated comic book heroes. What about the most powerful Black comic book superheroes? Like just unstoppable Black comic book. What three come to your mind immediately?
So there's one from, okay, so from the, and I know like comic book fans are going to jump down my throat. They're going to be like, there's more powerful, da 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 da. Please don't at me. I won't respond. I got to write. So for DC, and I'm going to be kind of partial because I wrote for the character, John Stewart.
Okay.
John Stewart is an architect. Like a lot of people forget that. They sometimes forget that because his military background is always kind of pushed to the forefront. I feel more so than his background as an architect, and also depending on whatever storyline you're reading, there may be more of a focus on one side of his life than the other. So as an architect, you have to be creative. Like you have to, your mind has to kind of go places where maybe other people's don't. Like if I'm building a house, because I'm not an architect, the thing has four walls and a roof. That's as basic as it's going to get. For an architect, they're looking at it from various, a variety of angles that I'm not going to see, and that's John Stewart, I
Mm.
feel. So when he constructs anything, from his ring, that I feel that's a kind of unlimited power, in his creativity right there. Albeit like when I wrote my story, he he created like a big tank, to kind of more military kind of oriented things. But I feel that he can get very creative in some of the constructs that he creates. On the Marvel side of things, there is a there are two characters. One is Spectrum, and back in the day, she was actually Captain Marvel. So I know that, I mean, I don't know if you've seen the movie with Brie Larson called Captain Marvel, but do you remember her friend? Her last name was Rambeau. She was a
I actually never got around to
young
seeing
lady to see it. Okay,
yeah, I'm gonna have to
yeah.
watch it.
So the actress that plays in that movie, she's actually going to be in the next James Bond movie.
I did
But
hear
her,
about that though.
yeah,
Yeah, I heard about that.
Latasha Lynch. So Latasha Lynch's character in the Captain Marvel movie has a daughter. Her name is Monica Rambeau, and in the comic books, Monica Rambeau she actually has a few names: Captain Marvel, Photon, but also Spectrum.
Okay.
And her abilities are on par with Captain Marvel's characters, the current one, the white lady from the movie.
Yeah.
Um, so in the comic books, she is, I mean, she her abilities are so just kind of, top level, that I don't think that even, and I know once again people are going to jump down my throat, but I don't think that even Superman could kind of deal with her. Like she's that powerful, but she is not getting the screen time that I feel that she deserves, in live action movies or TV shows. But she actually has been cast in a future television series, so we'll see. And then lastly, there's a character named Blue Marvel, and um,
I've heard of.
once again, more of his. You know about him?
Yeah, I've heard of. Yeah, I've
Okay.
heard. Yeah, my buddies, like I said, the guy that I was gonna have on as a co-host, he has gone on about Blue Marvel
Blue
before.
Marvel, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
He and
absolutely.
I forget his real name, but that dude right there. He is so
Yeah,
he is super powered. Once again, his, I think, abilities are like cosmic or like photon based, like not even not reality changing, but there's so much that this dude can do.
yeah.
And once again, he has not been given the shot, the spotlight that I feel that even in comics, like whenever he's in comics, I think he had his own series,
Mm.
which I think was a mini series, and then after that, he always appears in somebody else's book. Um, and I don't, and it's just kind of frustrating to see that, and because I feel that the character is strong enough to carry his own story, so, or his own series.
Yeah, for sure. So wrapping up, Robert,
Mhm.
what number one, where can we find you
Yeah.
on all your social media links? Go ahead and give all your social media links and your website. You have a pretty dope website, by the way. I love it.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Shout out to Amanda Makepeace. She set that WordPress up in such a way that it makes it easy for somebody like me to
Yes.
keep it up. So, but my web address is Robert K. Jeffrey. It's JEFFREY.com. RobertKJeffrey.com. And social media handles are, for Facebook, Robert K. Jeffrey, and Instagram is the same thing, Robert K. Jeffrey. Twitter, I don't use as much, so I don't really direct people, to there. But if they do want to go, it's SY as an N as a Nathan, CH RKJ. So Sync RKJ. That was before I learned how to utilize the internet and just use my name. So, but yeah, those are all the places you can find me.
Sure. So what, as we get ready to close out, what final tips do you have for aspiring comic book writers or just graphic novel writers or prose writers? What tips do they have for ones that just have not got it started yet, or they're just, they're stuck in a wall? What tips do you have for them?
Mhm. So there's I'm gonna steal from Nike and just say just do it. Um and and I know that that's a very general statement. Um but you can kind of make it smaller to kind of fit whatever you're trying to do. So if you're trying to learn more about your craft, pick up as many books as you can to learn about it. Listen to podcasts like this, go to workshops, or go to YouTube and just do a search for how to write. Yeah, the internet is very vast, so that's one angle. You can just do it. If you've hit a wall, try to I always say go, stand up from the computer,
Mm.
or from the table where you're handwriting and just take a walk, go outside and breathe and then go back and just do it, so and try to do it as much as possible. And learning about the business side of this, that's another thing where you can just do it. I think a lot of us, and me included, because I've been kind of burnt a couple of times, when it comes to comics, specifically. And it's partly because, I trusted too easily. That's one part of it. But then also, I didn't do my homework as far as the business side of things. So
Mm.
that's something that I think our focus is always so much on creative, create, 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 but we don't look back, we don't look into the business side of it, and it's something that I'm still learning in my late 30s
Mm.
about. It just is what it is. I try to be as real as possible when it comes to this stuff, but just do that, just do it, um, and just be the best person that you can be. Try to pay it forward as much as possible. Um, because when I was growing up, and I'm not saying that there weren't people there who would have offered the help, but I don't I didn't really have any access to people. So do when you hit a spot where you can kind of impart some knowledge or at least try to help a little bit, try to do that, as much as possible. I always say only after the person has actually tried to do the work themselves. So, but yeah, yeah, those are some tips that I
Robert,
would try to
yeah,
offer.
yeah, absolutely. Robert, I really appreciate you coming onto the show and imparting this
Yeah,
knowledge. I mean, I'm going to go research these characters and even look more into Marvel myself because my friends were ranting and raving about them not very long ago. Like, oh my gosh, Blue Marvel is pretty much unstoppable. And I'm like, man, who is this dude? I need to look into him because I also think of like Doctor
yeah,
Manhattan. I mean, he's not a black character, at least in the comics, but that dude is
hmm
in
yeah.
my mind, he's unstoppable too. He can pretty much go anywhere or create anything. So, yeah, thank you for coming on to the show.
Yeah.
I'm going to post all of his social media links, his website, even links to his some of his books in the show notes as well. And yeah, thank you for coming on once again. I really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, not a problem. And like I said, thanks for bringing me on. I mean, thanks for the invite. So,
Absolutely, absolutely. So everybody, thanks for tuning in. This is Roll with Soul of a Rider closing out, and we'll see you next week.